The reluctant meeting. Alexander Reed drummed his fingers against the mahogany table, checking his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The restaurant his sister had chosen was needlessly pretentious. All crystal chandeliers and white tablecloths that probably cost more than some people's monthly rent. He adjusted his tie, already regretting his promise to Vivian. "Just one date," she had pleaded over the phone. "You've buried yourself in that company for 3 years since Julia left. One evening won't kill you." He'd agreed purely to silence her persistent matchmaking attempts. At 36, Alexander had built Horizon Technologies into a billion-dollar empire, revolutionizing sustainable energy storage. He had board meetings to attend, investors to appease, and a new product launch in 6 weeks. Romance was a distraction he neither wanted nor needed. His phone buzzed with an email notification. Perfect. An excuse to end this charade early. "Sorry, emergency at work," he would say. A classic effective exit strategy. The message opened, and he began crafting his response when a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "You must be Alexander." He looked up, prepared to offer a perfunctory greeting before making his escape. Instead, the carefully constructed words dissolved on his tongue. The woman standing before him wore no designer dress or excessive jewelry. Her curly black hair was pulled into a messy bun with several rebellious strands framing her face. She carried a weathered leather satchel covered in peculiar stickers. Marine creatures, if he had to guess. "Elise Chen," she offered, extending her hand with a smile that reached all the way to her amber eyes. "Sorry I'm late. A baby sea turtle decided today was a perfect day for unexpected complications." Alexander found himself shaking her hand, noticing the slight roughness of her palm against his. "Baby sea turtle? I work at the Oceanside Marine Research Center," she explained, settling into her chair with a grace that seemed unconscious. "We're rehabilitating injured sea creatures. My little patient wasn't cooperating with his treatment today." "You're a veterinarian?" he asked, genuinely curious despite himself. Elise laughed, a sound both melodic and uninhibited. "Marine biologist, though sometimes it feels like being a kindergarten teacher for fish." Something about her openness caught him off guard. There was no pretense, no careful measuring of words that he'd grown accustomed to in his world of corporate strategy. "Your sister mentioned you run some kind of tech company?" She picked up her menu, studying it with the same focused expression he imagined she gave to her research. "Horizon Technologies. We develop energy storage solutions." He delivered the line with practiced precision, the same way he did in interviews. "The ones using recycled lithium and sodium components?" Her eyes widened. "I read about your work in Environmental Science Monthly. You're helping reduce battery waste in oceans by nearly 30%. Alexander blinked. Most of his blind dates either knew nothing about his work or pretended interest to impress him. Elise's genuine enthusiasm was refreshing. "You read Environmental Science Monthly?" he asked. "Religiously." "Our oceans are dying, Alexander. Anyone working to prevent that is doing something right in my book." The waiter appeared, and Elise ordered without hesitation the chef's sustainable seafood special and a glass of local white wine. Alexander found himself mirroring her choice. As their conversation unfolded, Alexander noticed his phone remained untouched beside his plate. Elise spoke passionately about her research, her hands animating her stories about coral rehabilitation and the intelligence of octopuses. When she talked about the sea, her entire face transformed, lit from within by purpose and wonder. "Do you ever just stop and watch the ocean?" she asked suddenly. "Not as something to study or solve, but just to experience?" Alexander considered the question. "I have a beach house in Malibu I haven't visited in almost a year." "That's practically criminal," she teased, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "The ocean reminds us we're part of something bigger. I think everyone needs that reminder sometimes." For the first time in longer than he could remember, Alexander felt the weight of his responsibilities lighten, if only for an evening. This wasn't what he had expected when he reluctantly agreed to this date. Elise Chen wasn't what he expected at all. Breaking barriers. 3 weeks after their unexpected first date, Alexander found himself sitting cross-legged on a weathered dock at 5:30 a.m., a cup of coffee warming his hands against the morning chill. Beside him, Elise peered through high-powered binoculars at the horizon, where the ocean met the lightening sky. "There!" she whispered excitedly, passing him the binoculars. "Quick, look!" Alexander adjusted the focus, following her pointing finger to spot a pod of dolphins breaking the surface in perfect synchronicity, their sleek bodies glistening in the first rays of dawn. "Worth getting up at 4 in the morning?" Elise asked, her smile evident in her voice. Surprisingly, it was. Alexander had never been a morning person. His creativity peaked at midnight when emails slowed and he could think. But there was something undeniably magical about witnessing the world wake up beside someone who found such joy in it. "I'll admit it," he conceded, returning the binoculars. "Though I'm still questioning your definition of a perfect third date?" Elise laughed, the sound carrying across the water. "Not everyone gets a private dolphin viewing. I'm very selective about who I bring here." After their first dinner, Alexander had surprised himself by calling her the very next day. Their second date had been at an art exhibition featuring ocean photography, where Elise had known several of the photographers personally. Now on their third encounter, she'd insisted on showing him her world at daybreak. "Most people I date can't handle my schedule," she admitted, pulling her knees to her chest. "I'm up before dawn for research, sometimes work weekends when there's an emergency rescue. My last boyfriend said dating me was like dating a ghost who smelled perpetually of salt water." Alexander found himself reaching for her hand, a gesture that felt both foreign and natural. "My last serious relationship ended because I was too predictable, too consumed by work, too rigid." Elise squeezed his fingers. "Julia?" He nodded, surprised that he'd mentioned her name during their first dinner. She wanted spontaneity, adventure. "I wanted 5-year plans and stability, and yet here you are, watching dolphins at dawn with a woman who keeps emergency wetsuit gear in her car trunk," Elise teased, but her eyes were gentle with understanding. "Here I am," he echoed, realizing just how out of character this all was, and how little that bothered him. The following weeks fell into a rhythm neither had anticipated. Alexander cleared his Tuesday evenings for dinner at Elise's modest beachside apartment, where she cooked elaborate seafood dishes and taught him about sustainable fishing. In return, he invited her to the Horizon Technologies research lab, watching her eyes light up at their experimental algae-based energy storage prototypes. On a rainy Sunday afternoon, Alexander found himself helping Elise reorganize her research materials. Her apartment was the opposite of his minimalist penthouse, bookshelves overflowing with marine biology texts, walls covered in underwater photographs, and seemingly random specimens in labeled containers. "How can you think in this chaos?" he asked, attempting to alphabetize a stack of research papers while Elise sorted through water quality reports. "How can you think without it?" she countered, gesturing around her. "All this mess is connected, like an ecosystem. Everything influences everything else." "In my world, disorder means inefficiency," Alexander explained. "Clear systems create predictable outcomes." Elise put down her papers and moved to sit beside him on the floor. "Is that what you want from life? Predictable outcomes?" The question struck him more deeply than she could know. "I built my company on being able to control variables. It's how I succeeded where others failed." "And us?" Elise asked softly. "Am I just another variable in your equation?" Alexander studied her face, the scattering of freckles across her nose from days in the sun, the small scar above her eyebrow from a research diving accident she'd told him about, the direct gaze that never seemed to hide anything. "You're the variable I never accounted for," he admitted. She leaned forward slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted. Instead, Alexander closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that felt like diving into unknown waters, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Elise's arms wrapped around his neck as the kiss deepened, and Alexander found himself pulling her closer, research papers forgotten as they explored this new territory between them. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Elise smiled against his lips. "Still think chaos is inefficient?" she whispered. Alexander laughed softly. "I might need more evidence to change my position." "Scientists now, are we?" Elise's eyes sparkled as she pulled him toward her bedroom. "I believe that can be arranged." Later, lying in her bed with afternoon rain pattering against the windows, Alexander watched Elise sleeping peacefully beside him. Her apartment was too small, too cluttered, too far from his office. By all logical metrics, this relationship shouldn't work. And yet, for the first time in years, he felt fully present, fully alive, as if he'd been moving through life on autopilot until she appeared. Storms and shelter. The call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. Alexander reached for his phone, expecting a crisis from the International Division of Horizon Technologies. Instead, Elise's name illuminated the screen. Alex? Her voice was tight, controlled in a way he'd never heard before. There's been an oil spill near the research center. It's bad, really bad. I have to go. He was fully awake instantly. Where are you now? At the center. We're organizing emergency response teams. The sound of frantic activity buzzed in the background. I might not be in touch for a while. I'm coming to you, he said, already out of bed and reaching for clothes. You don't need to. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Alexander arrived at the Oceanside Marine Research Center to find it transformed into crisis headquarters. Volunteers in various states of preparation moved with urgent purpose. He spotted Elise in the center of the chaos, hair hastily pulled back, issuing instructions with the authority of someone born to lead during disasters. Her eyes widened when she saw him. You actually came. What do you need? He asked simply. For the next 72 hours, Alexander forgot he was the CEO of a billion-dollar company. He helped coordinate volunteer transportation, ordered food for exhausted rescue teams, and set up an impromptu communication center using his tech industry connections. He made calls to environmental contacts he'd never leveraged for personal reasons before. When Elise stumbled from exhaustion after 30 straight hours of coordinating rescue efforts for oil-covered seabirds, he guided her to a quiet corner where she could sleep for 3 precious hours. On the 4th day, when the immediate crisis had stabilized into a grim cleanup operation, Alexander found Elise standing alone on the beach, staring at the containment booms attempting to hold back the spreading oil. Dark circles underscored her eyes, and her hands were raw despite the protective gloves she'd worn. We lost the entire North Colony of sea lions, she said without turning. The oil company is already spinning this as a minor incident with limited environmental impact. Alexander stood beside her, following her gaze to the contaminated water. I made some calls. 3 major environmental news outlets will be here tomorrow, and I've arranged for independent scientists to conduct assessments. Elise turned to look at him then. Really look at him. His expensive shoes ruined by oil and sand, designer shirts stained beyond repair, face unshaven and tired from the same sleepless days she'd endured. Why? She asked. Why are you doing all this? Alexander considered the question carefully. He could have given many answers about environmental responsibility or corporate ethics. Instead, he gave her the truth. Because it matters to you, and you matter to me. Something in Elise's carefully maintained composure finally broke. The tears she'd been holding back for days came in a sudden rush, and Alexander pulled her against his chest, letting her grief and exhaustion pour out while he sheltered her from the curious eyes of passing volunteers. I'm supposed to protect them, she sobbed. That's my job. And I couldn't save them all. You saved more than would have been saved without you, he murmured into her hair. I've watched you these past days, Elise. You've been incredible. When her tears subsided, Alexander led her to his car, insisting she needed proper rest. For once, she didn't argue. At his penthouse, he ran her a hot bath, ordered food, and provided clean clothes, all without discussion. It was what she needed, and he recognized that she had reached her limit of decision-making for one day. Later, as they lay in his bed, Elise curled against him in borrowed pajamas too large for her frame. She spoke into the darkness. No one's ever seen me like that before. Her voice was quiet, vulnerable. At my worst, at my weakest. I'm always the strong one, the one with answers. Alexander stroked her hair, breathing in the clean scent that had replaced the smell of oil and distress. You don't always have to be strong. Not with me. Is that what relationships are supposed to be? she asked, sounding genuinely curious. A place to be weak sometimes? Alexander thought about his previous relationships, the careful distance he'd always maintained, the parts of himself he'd kept protected and private. How different this felt, how much more real. I think, he said slowly, relationships are about having someone who sees all sides of you and stays anyway. Elise was quiet for so long that Alexander thought she had fallen asleep. Then she propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him in the dim light filtering through his bedroom windows. I think I'm falling in love with you, Alexander Reed, she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of her confession. And that terrifies me more than any oil spill. Alexander reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his heart beating a rhythm he'd forgotten it knew. Being terrified together seems better than being terrified alone. She laughed softly, the sound healing something in both of them, before leaning down to kiss him with a tenderness that spoke more eloquently than words. Stay, he whispered against her lips. Not just tonight. As long as you'll have me, she answered, settling back into his arms, where she fit as perfectly as if she'd always belonged there. The distance between stars. Alexander stared at the quarterly projections on his office monitor, but the numbers blurred together. 6 months into his relationship with Elise, his ability to compartmentalize had begun to fail him. His thoughts drifted to her constantly, wondering what new creature she was studying today, whether she'd remembered to eat lunch, what she might suggest for dinner. You seem distracted, observed Miranda, his chief financial officer, after he'd asked her to repeat the same point twice during their meeting. Just considering all angles, he deflected, straightening in his chair. But the truth was more complicated. For the first time in his career, Alexander's personal life was bleeding into his professional one, and the sensation was both intoxicating and alarming. 2 nights ago, he'd fallen asleep watching Elise sketch underwater scenes in a notebook, her feet resting in his lap, and realized with startling clarity that he'd never been happier. That happiness terrified him. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Reed, Julia Winters from Vertex Partners is here regarding the potential acquisition. Alexander froze. Julia, his ex-fiancée, now a high-powered venture capitalist, was the last person he expected to see today. Send her in, he said after a moment's hesitation. Julia entered with the confident stride he remembered well. Her tailored suit and sleek blonde hair were exactly as polished as they had been during their 3-year relationship. Alexander, she greeted him with a professional smile. You're looking well. Julia, this is unexpected. Vertex is considering backing Horizon's expansion into Asian markets, she explained, setting her briefcase on the chair across from him. I volunteered to handle the preliminary discussions. Alexander maintained his composure, though his mind raced. I wasn't aware Vertex had interest in clean energy. We've diversified, she replied, then tilted her head. You seem different. It's been 2 years, he said simply. No, it's something else. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You seem lighter somehow. The meeting proceeded with meticulous professionalism, but Alexander couldn't shake the unnerving sensation of past and present colliding. Julia knew him, knew the man he'd been, the disciplined, unwavering CEO who had once chosen a crucial merger meeting over her birthday dinner. The man who prioritized growth projections over personal connections. Dinner tonight? Julia suggested as they concluded, to discuss next steps. Just like old times. I have plans, Alexander replied, surprising himself with how easily the refusal came. Cancel them, she said, the familiar challenging glint in her eye. Vertex could be exactly what Horizon needs for global expansion. The old Alexander would have agreed immediately. Business first, always. I'll check my schedule and let you know, he said instead, escorting her to the door. That evening, Alexander arrived at Elise's apartment distracted, the conversation with Julia echoing in his mind. Elise was preparing dinner, humming along to music, her bare feet padding across the kitchen tile. Earth to Alex, she said, waving a wooden spoon in front of his face. You've been staring at that same wine bottle for 5 minutes without opening it. Sorry. He uncorked the Cabernet Sauvignon. Long day. Elise studied him with the perceptive gaze that missed nothing. Something happened. Alexander hesitated. Julia came to my office today. Her firm is interested in backing Horizon's international expansion. Elise's stirring slowed. Your ex-fiancée, Julia? She wants to have dinner tomorrow to discuss the partnership. Alexander poured 2 glasses of wine. It would be strictly business. Then why do you look like you're confessing to a crime? Elise asked, her tone light but her eyes serious. Because I'm not sure it would be just business for her. He handed Elise a glass. She has a way of blurring lines. And do you still have feelings for her? The directness of Elise's question caught him off guard. No, he answered honestly. But seeing her reminded me of who I used to be. The man she knew. And who was that? Alexander sipped his wine, organizing his thoughts. Someone who never would have watched dolphins at dawn or spent 4 days cleaning oil off seabirds. Someone who built walls so high that no one could see over them. Are you afraid she'll remind you of that person? Elise asked, turning down the heat on the stove. Or that you're still him? The question struck too close to a fear Alexander hadn't fully acknowledged. Over the following days, Julia's reappearance triggered something in him, a retreat to familiar territory. He began working later, answering Elise's calls with distracted brevity. The Vertex partnership represented everything he'd once prioritized: expansion, growth, legacy. When he canceled their weekend getaway to the beach for an emergency strategy session, Elise didn't argue. But when he missed her research presentation at the Oceanographic Institute, an achievement she'd worked toward for months, something fundamental shifted. I tried calling, he explained when he finally arrived at her apartment, 3 hours after her presentation had ended. The meeting ran long and it was more important, Elise finished for him, her voice calm but distant. I understand. That's not fair, he protested. This deal could revolutionize clean energy implementation across Asia. Millions of people would benefit. I'm not questioning the importance of your work, Alexander. She sat on her sofa, curling her legs beneath her. But I am questioning what's happening to us. Nothing's happening. I'm busy, that's all. You're retreating, she corrected. Every day you're a little further away. Ever since Julia reappeared, Alexander felt defensive anger rise. This isn't about Julia. It's exactly about Julia, or rather what she represents. Elise's eyes were bright with unshed tears. You're scared of how much you've changed, how much you feel for me. So you're running back to what's familiar, a life where work justifies everything and feelings stay safely contained. That's ridiculous, he snapped, even as a voice inside him whispered that she was right. Is it? Elise stood, approaching him with painful tenderness. Alexander, I love you. All of you. The brilliant businessman and the man who held me when I cried over dead sea lions. But you have to decide if you can love all of me too, not just the parts that fit neatly into your carefully ordered life. What does that mean? It means I need space while you figure this out. Her voice broke slightly. Because I won't compete with the walls you're rebuilding around yourself. You're asking me to choose between you and my company, he said, anger masking his fear. No, Elise shook her head sadly. I'm asking you to choose a version of yourself that can have both. But right now, you're choosing neither. You're choosing safety. When Alexander left her apartment that night, the distance between them felt vast as the space between stars, cold, dark, and seemingly uncrossable. Part 5. Constellations aligned. The Vertex partnership had proceeded exactly as planned. 6 weeks after his argument with Elise, Alexander stood at the window of his Tokyo hotel room, staring at the neon-lit cityscape 30 stories below. The contract had been signed this morning after marathon negotiations. By all objective measures, it was the crowning achievement of his career. He had never felt emptier. His phone chimed with congratulatory messages from the board, from investors, from Julia. He ignored them all, focusing instead on the background image on his screen, a photo of Elise at sunset, laughing as ocean spray caught in her hair, unaware of the camera. He hadn't spoken to her since their fight, his pride and fear forming an impenetrable barrier. A notification from the Oceanside Marine Research Center's social media page appeared. He had never unfollowed it. The headline made his heart stutter. OMRC lead researcher Elise Chen accepts position with International Marine Conservation Initiative. Alexander's fingers moved without conscious thought. Opening the article, Elise had been offered a prestigious role leading a global team studying climate change impacts on marine ecosystems. The position would take her to research stations around the world for the next 3 years. She was leaving. The realization hit him with physical force, driving the air from his lungs. While he'd been hiding in spreadsheets and projections, Elise had continued moving forward, continued growing. She wasn't waiting for him to figure himself out. Alexander closed his eyes, remembering her words. "I'm asking you to choose a version of yourself that can have both." In that moment of clarity, halfway around the world from home, Alexander finally understood. The walls he'd built hadn't protected him. They'd imprisoned him. Success without someone to share it with was just achievement, cold and impersonal as the numbers in his quarterly reports. 3 days later, Alexander strode through the doors of the Oceanside Marine Research Center, heart pounding. He had flown directly from Tokyo, stopping only to shower and change at his penthouse. The receptionist directed him to the rehabilitation area, where Elise was reportedly finishing her final week before departure. He found her in a back room, kneeling beside a large tank, speaking softly to a juvenile sea turtle as she checked its injured flipper. She hadn't noticed him yet, and for a moment, Alexander simply watched her, the gentle competence of her hands, the absolute focus in her expression, the quiet joy she took in her work. This was the woman he loved, not despite her passion and unpredictability, but because of it. "Your patient looks better than the last time I saw him," he said quietly. Elise's head snapped up, her eyes widening. "Alexander." "I hear congratulations are in order," he continued, stepping into the room. "The international position sounds incredible." She stood slowly, wiping her hands on a towel. "It's a remarkable opportunity. You deserve it." He moved closer, stopping when he saw her instinctive step backward. "I know I have no right to be here after disappearing for weeks." "You don't," she agreed, but her tone held more sadness than anger. "I had to see you before you left." Alexander took a deep breath. "To tell you that you were right about everything." Elise's expression remained guarded. "Which part specifically?" "I was terrified," he admitted. "Not of loving you, but of losing myself in that love, of becoming unrecognizable to myself. And now I realize the man I was before you isn't someone I want to be anymore." Alexander's voice grew stronger with conviction. "I signed the Vertex deal, then immediately restructured my leadership team. I've appointed a new chief operations officer who will handle day-to-day management, effective immediately." Surprise flickered across Elise's features. "You're stepping down?" "Stepping back," he clarified, "to focus on research and development, and on building a life that matters beyond balance sheets. I've also established a foundation dedicated to marine ecosystem protection with a special focus on oil spill prevention and cleanup technology." "Why would you do that?" she asked, vulnerability finally showing through her composed exterior. "Because even without you, I can't go back to who I was before." Alexander moved closer, relieved when she didn't retreat this time. "You changed me, Elise. You showed me what it means to live fully, to care deeply, and I can't unfeel that, even if you're halfway around the world." Tears gathered in her eyes. "I never wanted you to change your life for me." "I didn't," he said, reaching tentatively for her hand. "I changed it for us, for the man I want to be, someone worthy of loving you." Her fingers curled around his. "I was offered the position 3 weeks ago. I haven't accepted yet." Hope flared in Alexander's chest. "Why not?" "Because as exciting as it sounds, traveling the world studying oceans wouldn't feel complete without someone to share the discoveries with." Her voice trembled slightly. "Someone who sees the wonder in both the grand scale and the smallest details. Someone who understands why it all matters. Someone like me," he asked softly. Elise's smile broke through like sunrise. "Exactly like you." Alexander pulled her gently into his arms, the weeks of separation dissolving as she melted against him. "What if," he murmured against her hair, "there was a way to have both? Your global research and us?" She leaned back to look at him. "What are you suggesting?" "The Foundation needs a lead researcher," he said. "Someone brilliant who knows marine ecosystems intimately. The position would require extensive travel to vulnerable coastlines worldwide, coordinating with local scientists, establishing research protocols." Understanding dawned in Elise's eyes. "You created a position for me." "I created a foundation for causes we both believe in," he corrected. "Whether you work with it or take the other position is entirely your choice. I'll support you either way, even if it means navigating a long-distance relationship for 3 years. Elise reached up to touch his face, tracing the new lines of exhaustion around his eyes. "You really have changed." "Not changed," Alexander said, covering her hand with his. "Evolved. Into someone who finally understands that the most valuable things in life can't be measured or controlled. Like love," she whispered. "Exactly like love." He leaned down to kiss her softly, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. "Which is why I want to ask you something that terrifies me more than any business deal ever has." Elise's breath caught as he opened the box, revealing a ring with a striking blue-green stone that matched the color of the ocean on a clear day.